Welcome back to the Call Up, your go-to podcast on the future stars of Major League Baseball. I'm Arm Layton. He's Jack McMullen, and we promise to keep it under an hour today because we're talking about topics finally. It's nice to kind of get back into the flow of what's going on in minor league baseball and what's going on in the prospect world and fly through some different topics. Don't get me wrong, I love talking about these farm systems. I love breaking them down for an hour and a half, sometimes more than that. But I do miss the fresh topical things. And that's what we're going to do today, Jack, because we've got some fun stuff. We've got a trade that involves several notable prospects, including, a fringe top 100 guy in Gabriel Gonzalez between the
Yeah.
Twins and the Mariners. That was, of course, headlined by Jorge Polanco. We have a pre MLB, right? We've talked about pre ARB. How about pre debut contracts for Colt Keith and the Tigers? What that looks like, what we think about that deal. And then finally, we're going to discuss some other players that could kind of fit that bill. And with the pre debut contracts starting to become more common and more
Yeah.
accepted by teams, who are some players that can fit that bill? And who are some players, or I guess, what are the criteria of those players that we should be looking for if you're a team? What are the things that make you feel safe in investing in a player who hasn't debuted yet? Jack has his thoughts on what those aspects of a player may be. I have mine. We're going to see what the overlap is because so far it's kind of been all over the place in terms of the profile and types of players that get those deals. But I think we're going to start to see a more common trend, and Colt Keith might be indicative of that. But Jack, some fun topics as we kind of fly through some more happenings, in the minor leagues. And I think there's going to be some more prospects moved soon.
It feels like baseball season, which is really nice with this kind of episode where it's 40 to 45 minutes. And, we're going to kind of bounce around a couple of news stories on the minor league baseball front. And that's what we're going to do 3 times a week when the season comes around. And like, trust me, by August or September, I think you and I are both clamoring for top 10s. Like, hey, we want to do more position rankings and organizational rankings and things like that, top prospects and all that. The grass is always greener. And now it's like, okay, we can get away from the top 15 Orioles prospects and Red Sox prospects, and we can go to, hey, this guy just got traded. How does he fit in his new digs?
Yeah, and that's exactly where we'll start because this was a fun one. Um, Again, I'm hoping for more trades because this is just, it makes the conversation more fun. It makes things more interesting in terms of the way you can look at prospects and maybe why a team would be willing to part with them, why a team would be willing to acquire them. And I think this is a perfect example of that because we've talked about Gabriel Gonzalez, and uh, he was one of the guys that when we talked about the Mariners' top prospects, we spent a good amount of time on him. And if somebody wants to go back, if you're listening, go back and check out that episode. A lot of the concerns, there was a lot of positive, obviously. He's a French top 100 prospect. He was a top 100 prospect for us at the end of the top 100 or at the end of the season last year. But he was a guy that was probably right on the chopping block as we went into 2024. And as we're formulating our list for 24, he's a guy that might just miss or might just sneak in, just to give you an idea. He's going to probably slot right in that 90 to 110, 115 range. And the big reason why, we'll get into that, is kind of just this tweener profile and some, I guess, yellow flags that are some concerns. Before we get into those specifics, we'll just kind of break down the trade here that sent Jorge Polanco to Seattle. We'll talk about the big league implications more on the Just Baseball show. I will say, just in short though, you can see why the Mariners were willing to make this move and willing to give up some intriguing pieces because Polanco, when healthy, is everything that they needed, especially at second base where they've had a bit of a hole there. They've been plugging and playing, trying to find guys to fill in there. We thought it might be Ryan Bliss. We thought it might be Rojas at some points. Like, we weren't sure who was going to end up slotting in there. Arias seemed like an option at one point. So now they have a guy that can be an all-star when healthy. But they had to give up a little bit to get him. They give up Gabriel Gonzalez, who is French top 100 guy, easily a top 10 prospect in their system. Probably would have slotted in the 6 to 7 range after the draft and some of the guys that have performed really well. But then they also give up Anthony DeSclafani, which I think is probably viewed as a net negative asset, which I think is a little bit interesting because innings eaters and just mediocre pitching seems to be going for about $12 million, which is
Yeah.
what Disco is owed this coming year. So I thought that part was interesting. But they also get Justin Topa, who's a solid reliever that's going to be
Yeah.
going over to Minnesota as well. And then Darren Bowen. Darren Bowen's a popular name in the I think, very analytical circles, the people that are very into pitch shape and pitch design and things like that, because Bowen does check some of those boxes. So Bowen is an intriguing arm to get thrown into this package as well, while you're already getting Gabriel Gonzalez. So the two prospects being Gonzalez and Bowen. We'll talk about Gonzalez probably a little bit more, and then Bowen, tell you a little bit about, what you need to know about him as a pitcher. And then to get two big league pieces, though, they get some pitching depth in Desclafani, which is much needed because Chris Paddock's probably going to end up grabbing a spot in that rotation. Now you have, another insurance policy and just another arm there. And then, as I mentioned, Topa being that other bullpen arm for them. But we're here to talk about prospects. And
Right.
I saw a lot of people on Twitter, Jack, that were kind of puzzled by the idea that the Mariners would part with Gonzalez. And, this is a top 100 prospect. Why would you move him? He was one of the most productive teenagers last year. All of those things are true. But I also think the fact that the Mariners were willing to move him kind of validated a lot of our concerns. And you can go back to that episode where we talk about the Mariners' top prospects. And the genesis of the conversation was, this is a big guy, 6 foot, 225 pounds. He is pretty maxed out physically, right? Unless you can kind of convert some of that weight into muscle. He's already a pretty strong guy, though. The EVs just are not great. What really has made him productive is that he has a fantastic feel to hit. And that's the part that I think gets undersold. I've seen hit grades that are below average and then power grades that are plus. I think it's totally backwards. I can see if you look at him as a player and maybe you just look at the stat sheet, yeah, I could understand why you might think that. But really, I think the hit tool is above average and the power is kind of fringy. And that's the problem because he's slowed down a little bit. He's going to be limited to a corner. It's not even great defense in a corner. It's kind of average at best. He's got a great arm, which helps. So you figure he plays right. But a 90th percentile exit velocity of 101.5 miles per hour. He's young, but young usually correlates to, okay, he can get more physical. He can fill out his frame. Gonzalez is filled out, man. Like maybe he matures and adds some man strength, but how much? I think the concern is how much power is he going to hit for? He's extremely aggressive, a chase rate that, flirted with 40%. And we saw that those red flags kind of rear their head and his batted ball data normalized. I would say his production normalized with the underlying batted ball data kind of catching up to him. It was a limp to the finish line for Gonzalez. I'm not saying he's a bad prospect. Again, he's a fringe top 100 guy, but I wanted to
Yeah.
explain for some people why the Mariners may be willing to move him. You look at some of their other pieces, Gonzalez looks like he could be a bit of a tweener, and he's going to have to really hit.
Yes, and he's not surplus right now if you look at him in the grand scheme of the Seattle Mariners, but based on who they extend, who they don't extend, Gabby Gonzalez can quickly become surplus, it seems. You've got a guy that is a corner outfielder. Okay, let's think about the outfield assortment for the Seattle Mariners for the foreseeable future. And this is something that I'm sure crossed Jerry DiPoto's mind when he was thinking about the main piece to attach to go get Jorge Polanco. Okay, Gonzalez is going to play right or left. Julio Rodriguez is our guy for the next decade and a half, hopefully his entire career. That knocks off one outfield spot. If they do make the decision to extend Cal Raleigh, Harry Ford will make the move to the outfield. You put him somewhere else, that's two spots right there. And then all of a sudden, you've got this gluttony of middle infield prospects. Colt Emerson, Cole Young. If that's your middle infield, what do you do with Samad Taylor, who's got 6 more years of control, who you just acquired for cash considerations? That guy is like a burner, legit. He is an outfielder all of a sudden. You've got other guys. What are we going to do with J.P. Crawford? He's under control for the next 4 years. Okay, if Colt Emerson gets up, all of a sudden you've got that guy in the outfield fold. Ty Pete, what happens there? Not to mention, you just drafted Johnny Farmelo, who looks like he could be a future big league outfielder. Lazaro Montes is probably a better prospect
Mm-hmm.
at this point in a corner outfield spot than Gabby Gonzalez. There are too many names that I just threw out that could get in the way of a guy that they may just be better than to warrant holding him for the sake of having your right fielder of the future. There's
Yeah.
no promise that he's the right fielder of the future. There's more space in the Twins organizational depth chart for Gonzalez to flourish.
Yeah.
He could run out of space in Seattle.
I agree. And I think that's a really good kind of just embodiment of the situation. And then you also look at they overslotted Aiden Smith in the fourth round of this year's draft, a guy that I know they like, and they're really intrigued by the upside, both from a hit and speed perspective. They also still have Jonathan Clase, who again, I think a lot of people would probably take Gonzalez over him, but it's just another name in the fold that you could be, okay with moving another outfielder because you have Clase. And the biggest thing for me is all of the guys that you mentioned, especially the outfielders, except for Montes, they provide something beyond just the bat. I think they're athletic, especially Farmelo. And Montes is the one guy you look at. Okay, limited to a meh corner at best. But when I look at a deal like this, you don't want to give up the guy that you are going to like regret, right? You don't want to be that Jordan. We traded Jordan kind of guy. And Lazaro Montes is the kind of guy that I'm checking even after the trade. If I'm a front office guy, I'm checking every month, just hoping that it doesn't all come together because, you're just going to have nightmares about that, right? Like that's going to be something that could come back and bite you. I look at Gabby Gonzalez. I see a path where it's like, oh man, I wish we held on to him and traded Clase instead. But I don't really know if I see a situation where it's like, how in the world did we give this guy up? He's a perennial all-star, because the path to him being a really good big leaguer, it needs to be one of two things. He needs to add a ton of power, and not a ton, I'd say multiple ticks in the EV department, a max of 108. He's 20 years old now. Like, how much more is he going to add? He's got to add almost a full notch power-wise, or he needs to become a plus hitter. And I think that might be the more realistic outcome, because even when he struggled in high A, zone contact was still at 85%. Overall contact was at 75%. And that's with a 37% chase rate. You imagine he cuts down the chase rate, those contact rates could, start to trickle up towards, plus territory. But now you have a plus hitter with limited defensive value, can't run much, and, average power ish. It's a weird profile. And I think that was enough for the Mariners to say, I don't know how this profile looks. And if he has a bad year this year, or just doesn't, if he hits 260, 275 with
Yeah.
average home run output, what's his value at that point? Now he's going to be 21 years old. So I think this was the time for them to capitalize. And I look at, you mentioned the outfielder specifically. How about just the names in general that I just would not move before Gonzalez? Of course, Cole Young, Harry Ford, Colt Emerson. Add Michael Arroyo to that. I would not move
Mhm.
Arroyo. I would move Gonzalez before him. So that kind of shows you where we think Arroyo is. Again, another fringe top 100 guy for me. Felnine Celestin, we've barely seen him play, but they paid a lot of money for him, and he's a crown jewel of
Tons.
the IFA class. They're not going to move him. And those are all guys that I think are ahead. Ty Pete, they just drafted. I think his upside is much more immense. Probably not going to move him. And then you get to the other side of it. I think the Twins probably preferred Gonzalez over Clase. They probably preferred Gonzalez over, some of the other names that would have been floated. I don't know Locklear versus Gonzalez. It's close because again, I've soured on Gonzalez more and more as I've kind of just dug into it, watched more, and seen these red flags that it's a good get for Minnesota in this deal, right? You're trading a guy that's owed 23 million if you pick up both his options, or
And
22 and a half.
and that didn't have a spot. Like Julian was gonna be the second baseman coming into the year. They needed to create space for Julian and Royce Lewis. How do you do that? You take Jorge Polanco out of the fold. Do you want to pay 23 million for a utility guy for the next 2 years? Their answer was no, so they decided to move him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from that lens, look, you're not trading an asset with years and years of control at,
No.
the league minimum. You're trading an asset that's below, his market value with the 2 years of control. But, it's not like this is a major asset. So I think getting Gonzalez is a great get. And there's still a path. Like I see like a Jesus Aguilar type of production. I know Aguilar had bursts of like big home run seasons in
Yeah.
Milwaukee, but just in kind of the middling range where it was average power. You'd think there would be way more power, but there's just not. Like a guy that just looks like he should be hitting for more power than he does. And but at the same time makes good contact, maybe a little bit more aggressive than you'd like to see. I could see something along those lines in the like kind of second tier seasons of Aguilar. If he can, improve the conditioning a little bit, be more agile, that would definitely help. So you never know what can happen. At the end of the day, he just turned 20 on January 4th. So there's plenty of time to work these things out. But I do think that it's worth noting that the Mariners probably had some concern with what they saw over the final 40 games, which was him hitting 186, 253, 293, and those
Yeah.
chase rates really rearing their head and a lot more, batted balls on the ground. So great get though in a vacuum because he's not the only player they got. They also got a great bullpen piece in Topa. They get pitching depth. They get a guy in Gonzalez who, you never know with prospects. It's so fluid. But I also think with the Mariners, they probably cashed in at the perfect time because it could kind of keep trending downwards for him. Do you have any other thoughts on Gonzalez? I do want to say again, the bat to ball really gets undersold for him. And if he is able to cut down on the chase, I think it'll allow the game power to play up more because pitchers were just throwing him stuff down and saying, roll over, I don't care. And he was rolling over a lot more in high A, but he doesn't strike out much. He again has a really good ability to spray the ball to all fields. He could be a doubles machine when it's all said and done. He's still a very solid prospect that needs to sort some things out. I'd be a lot more comfortable if he provided value defensively or had a little bit more power projection, but I will never cap a player this young, and a lot can still change. He could just get shredded over the offseason and something could change. So I
Right.
still think being able to get a guy that has a feel for the barrel like this is always a good thing, especially in a deal like this that helped your big league team too.
Yeah. My thing is, like last thing I have on Gonzalez, and then I have a couple of questions about Darren Bowen. The last thing on Gabby Gonzalez on my end is I do feel like this guy was the best of the rest in the Mariners
Mm-hmm.
organization, where you walk through like Young, Ford, Emerson, they're not going anywhere. Clase, too close in proximity. Michael Arroyo, you clumped in. Celestin, you clumped in. But like Gabby Gonzalez or Farmelo, which one are you moving? You just drafted Farmelo. You like the idea of Farmelo. You hold on to him. Ty Pete, same exact conversation as Farmelo. The one that I got to, yeah, you mentioned Locklear, but like Montes, I'm almost clumping Montes in with a Celestin, where
Just because
what
of the
you've seen is,
upside.
yeah, what you've seen is too good. This guy's at 1,000 OPS. He's driven in 100 in his first 120 minor league games, and he's hitting 200 or 300 with a what 440 OBP,
Yeah.
430 OBP. It's ridiculous. So like all of a sudden, your options of movable good prospects are limited to Gonzalez, Locklear. Nobody like Bliss isn't getting you that much. Like that's the thing, man. You run out of options quickly when you think about who you like more and who you're willing to part with. So I thought he was the best of the
Mm-hmm.
rest
And if I'm the Twins in their situation, I'd prefer. I think I'd prefer Gonzalez over Locklear just because
because
of,
he's a first baseman.
yeah, you look at their situation, I think it makes more sense for them. And you got more time for Gonzalez to develop, to mold him, whereas Locklear, he is what he is, and you're just gonna hope that he runs into enough power and figures it out. And some people might be put off by that swing a little
Like
bit.
we've got Matt Wallner at home. Like
Yeah,
obviously
exactly.
Locklear is better than Wallner, I think, in terms of like a bat to ball type player.
Yeah, but Wallner hits the living crap out of the baseball, and
So
like he's done it now at higher levels. So I agree. Like you're getting a hit over everything guy that they don't really have a ton of in that system. At least
no.
at the upper levels, they've started to add more to the fold. Of course, you have Brooks Lee and other guys, but in the outfield, it's kind of been a lot of the Larnick and Wallner types. So we'll get into Darren Bowen real quick,
Yeah.
and I think this was a really good ID by the Twins. I think this was just a great trade by the Twins. Don't get me wrong, the Mariners, they upgraded their big league team. That's great, but I don't want to undersell what the Twins were able to do here because they are also able to get an upside pitching prospect that it's early. The numbers were kind of a mixed bag for him in low A. Well, he's a Division two pitcher from North Carolina, Pembroke.
Pembroke.
Yeah,
Yep.
I like I'm always interested in those guys that just have this straight arrow upwards and have something click for him. Like he wasn't even starting for UNC Pembroke until the back end of the season. So a guy that just the results were not always there, but a data darling in a lot of ways. So it was always going to be a little bit of a slower burn for him as a professional. And I thought we saw some good things through the beginning of the year. Then his velocity tapered off as he started to. Again, this guy didn't really start much, through the early parts of his career. But some intriguing aspects to the pitch shapes and things like that. So, yeah, what was your question as it pertains to Darren Bowen, and then we can kind of fill in the rest.
It had to do with pitch shape.
Yeah.
Like he was pretty much a full-time starter this past year, first year of Pro Ball. but 19 appearances, spent 55 innings. So there wasn't much to speak of there. He was working in 3 inning, 4 inning spurts. 9.5 punch outs per nine, 4 walks per nine. I'm just curious, like, what is the pitch that eats for him? What pitch is his ticket to the big leagues?
Fastball.
Okay.
So if you look at the delivery too, he's skinny, he's loose, he's a good athlete, and it's just a very easy delivery. It's one of those unique ones too, where like the arm, it feels like he doesn't take it back that far because it's like one quick pullback, and he just slings it from this somewhat, it seems lower than it really is release point, and the ball just takes off. So it's got this kind of somewhat flat approach angle. I don't think anything jumps off of the page, but it just seems to get on hitters quickly, especially when he was throwing it at 93 to 95. So through his first 7 appearances, he averaged just a hair under 95 miles an hour, and the results were just bullying guys with the fastball. It's a small sample, right? This is only 39 batters. I'll expand it to 10 games. In his first 10 outings, he faced 67 batters. In zone whiff rate on the fastball of 30%, swinging strike rate at 18%. Like those are things that clearly the fastball is just deceiving them. Then working off of that is a good curveball that he commands pretty well, and a slider that's flashed as well. I don't know if it all works out for him as a starter. I think he's going to be one of those guys that just like he's going to be 25 and you're still looking at him like he's 22 because he's such a young pitcher in terms of
Yeah.
pitching years and pitching experience. But if I'm able to get that guy as basically a throw in this deal, I think it's a really intriguing arm to get. And look, if he's not able to hold the velo, if he's not able to really handle that starter's workload, he could be a really good reliever with that fastball sitting in the mid 90s because it did, when he was coming in relief, coming out of the bullpen in the early parts of the season. And
Yeah.
then that breaking ball really tunnels well off of it. And I'm looking at some of the outings out of the gate when he was relieving. His first 6 appearances were all in relief or like in a start where he was then just pull it after an inning or two. Went 8 1/3 innings, 1 hit, no runs. This was in low A, 3 walks, 15 Ks. So he was just overpowering low A hitters. And I know it's low A and he's a college arm, but this was a guy that was coming out of the pen for a Division II school.
Yeah.
So there's something here, and it'll be interesting to see if the Twins can unlock it.
Yeah. I do think it just kind of like tying the big league aspect into it. He's obviously the piece that'll put this trade over the top for Minnesota. He's the thing that it's like, hey, if he works out, we feel really good about making this deal in hindsight. I do think that the big league pieces will go a long way into making the Twins feel good and sleep easy, knowing that they traded an all-star caliber second baseman. If DeSclafani can be the 5 and they push Louis Varla into the bullpen, they probably feel good about that. If Topa is a good reliever again, they feel good about that. Gonzalez is the blue chip prospect that you got in return. But the thing that can make this a hindsight winner for Minnesota is probably Darren Bowen, no?
Yeah. Just even if they can get a big league reliever out of it, I think it does make it, a
So,
lot more intriguing.
so then you get 2 effective big league relievers, a 5 for a year, and a top 100 prospect at the
Yes.
time, fringe
Who you
top
could
100
repackage
prospect.
later, or you have, in your system, he's still going to slot probably in the 5 spot for us in that Twins update
Yeah.
that'll be coming up in the next couple weeks. But the other thing is Bowen's curveball is, again, I mentioned it briefly, but the command of it was pretty impressive. So that part of it makes it interesting. Maybe he can be a starter as he builds up the workload and fills out. He's very skinny. He could fill out, get stronger, and all of a sudden you've got something special here. I know some people in the industry were very high on him. I know Jeff Ponce specifically put out a tweet about him with Baseball America. I know Joe Doyle, who specifically covers the Mariners, put out some things about Bowen and how much he liked him when the Mariners drafted him. So there's definitely some smart minds out there that do like what they've seen from Bowen thus far.
I just want to go into the mind of Thad Levine. I want to ask him, it's like, hey, get me up to 100%, apply percentages of what you believe the value was on your return. And I bet
Yeah.
Gabriel Gonzalez is probably 40% of the deal. Topa was 30, 25. DeSclafani was another 20, and then
If
Bowen was
that, this
15 to
probably might be
20.
zero, especially given their financial constraints.
I think Bowen is probably a higher percentage than DeSclafani is, right?
Yes. And I think the only reason why the Twins got Gonzalez was they said, look, we're trying to shed money. And I know that
Yeah.
some money was kicked over to the Twins, but they're saying we're trying to shed money here. We're not when we trade Polanco, we don't want to bring money back. And the Mariners said, we'll kick you another prospect, or we'll kick you a better prospect,
Yeah.
and we'll kick you a little bit of money. And that's how they were able to make it happen. So great deal for both sides.
Yes.
Speaking of a great deal for both sides, we're going to talk about Colt Keith's extension before his debut. But before that, a quick break. All right. So nothing gets me more fired up than minor leaguers getting paid before they debut
Hmm.
because I don't care about the risk for the team. And generally, it's a player that I don't think it's much of a risk for a team. And this is a perfect example of that, right? You get Colt Keith here for, and no matter what the deal was, I feel like it was going to be a good deal for the Tigers just because no one's they have so much leverage in these negotiations. But I thought this was a pretty good deal for a guy that's going to be limited to a mediocre second or third. It's all about the bat. And has put up really good numbers, but was hurt a lot in 2022. We were the high guys on Keith, having him at number 66 in our top 100 entering the 2023 season because of what we saw from him, when he returned from injury. And then, just some of the things that I saw and I heard about him in spring training really gave him a lot of helium in my eyes. And we pushed him up there at number 66. And the crazy part was, even being the high guys with him at number 66 going into 2023, by the time we get to the midseason, we pushed him all the way up to the top 30. And so did everybody else. Maybe not to 30, but he was on, in the middle of everybody's top 100 list. So that
Yeah.
shows you how quickly he was able to really turn some heads and prove that he's a dude. And clearly the work ethic, and you've talked about it because we've had him on for a brief conversation that you had with him at the ballpark. Definitely go check that out if you want to hear a little bit more about just the psyche and the work ethic of a Colt Keith. But 6 years, $28.6 million guaranteed here. I know
Give me every digit. Come on.
you want to do it.
No, you do it. Do you remember the three remaining digits?
28.6425.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I was like, am I gonna have to try to go find this on Spa Track? Yeah. So
No, I got it.
that's it. Okay. I don't
Yeah.
know why there was the 0.6425.
I'll tell you right now, the 2030 club option, if it is not exercised, then it turns into a $2.6425 million buyout.
But
So
why? Why
I don't
6.425?
know. And we made the joke on the Just Baseball show, like that $500 is really important. That's a couple of haircuts. That might be 10 haircuts for Colt Keith. But the breakdown is age 2022 or age 22 season in 2024, he makes 2.5 mil. He got 2.5 mil to sign. Maybe 2 mil to sign. But he makes 2.5 in 24, 3.5 in 25, 4 in 26 and 27. That is final year pre-arb and arb one. Arb 2 and Arb 3, he makes 5 apiece. He would have hit the open market at 28 years old, but there is that club option for 10, then another club option for 13, and another club option for 15. So it can escalate to 9 for $82 million.
Yeah. And 9 for 82 is, I mean, again, you have the protection if you're the team that you could just decline those options, Scott Kingery style, who we're going to talk about.
Right.
But on the other side, it's very likely that they pick those up. And for a little bit of context here, Keith was a fifth round pick out of high school, really beloved for his feel to hit. And then he added a ton of impact. And it was really an injury, I think a couple of nagging injuries that really encouraged him to just transform his body. And he did that. And he became a physical beast. But he didn't lose the agility. He didn't, or I would say agility would probably be the wrong word. He didn't lose the adjustability and the malleability and the fluidity of his swing and his movement, which is huge, right? You still are fluid and adjustable with your swing, but now you just added impact. Sounds great to me. And the result was what he did in 2023 and what he did, in parts of 2022, which those 48 games coming off of injury or with injury kind of sandwich in between. In high A, he slashes 301, 375, 44. That's a 150 WRC plus. So that was enough for them to say, hey, in 2023, we're going to start you in double A. And in double A, 59 games there as a 21-year-old.
Stupid.
325, 391, 585 slash line, 23% K rate, 9% walk rate, 14 bombs. It's a 163 WRC plus. All right, Colt, you're going to triple A. Goes up to triple A, 67 games there, 287, 369, 521 slash line. Sees the strikeout rate drop by 3.5%. Sees the walk rate jump by 2.5%. 13 homers there, 119 WRC plus. But I don't look at WRC plus as much in AAA, especially for young guys, because the numbers there were kind of stupid with how good the pitching was, and you had some 30-year-olds, that were just putting up video game numbers there that made it harder for younger players to have that WRC plus really reflect how impressive what they were doing was. An 890 OPS should not only be 19% above league average, especially we should almost have an age adjusted WRC plus. One of these days we can get into that. I need to learn a little bit more about coding and Python and things like that. But all that to say, he showed enough. He almost gave you a full season in AAA. He gave you 300 plate appearances. This is a perfect candidate to give this deal to. The thing that's interesting, though, is not the best defender. He's worked hard at it, and he's gotten better, but he's going to be playing second for the Tigers, and he's going to be their opening day second baseman. That's why they're paying him $2 million and change this coming year. I love it. I get it. And we'll dive into the reasons why the Tigers would do this with Keith and what makes him appealing, other than what we just laid out numerically. But did this surprise you at all? Based on what you have come to understand as maybe the candidates for a pre-debut extension, right? Like Chourio is like Luis Robert, where it's just guy's a freakazoid. You might have an MVP on, basically a heist of a contract,
right?
But there's some volatility there a little bit. But he's just so talented that you're like, even if his 30th percentile outcome will still be a big leaguer in some capacity, we're fine. Those guys, it makes sense. It makes sense with Keith, but did this catch you off guard at all?
This felt like more of an outlier extension than I was expecting it to feel like when I saw it, because the whole thing that you've preached about Colt Keith is safety. You called him maybe the safest bat in the minor leagues. I want to extend safe. Absolutely. But I view safe in a different way. I almost never view the bat and offensive profile for anybody as safe, because shit can hit the fan. Like all of a sudden a 20% K rate can turn into 30 if your swing gets out of whack. And what do you do from there when you have defensive questions? The guys that like I would typically ID, and this is kind of leaking into the criteria conversation, but I want to stick to Keith right now. The guys that I would typically identify are ones that can make me the money back defensively. And he's not that guy. But what he will do is he will make them $28 million by flirting with 300 or flirting with 30 homers or flirting with 40 doubles. Like he's going to figure out a way to be a successful big league bat. And I think that they have enough of a sample to prove that. If he didn't do it in AAA for 4 months, I would say no, like it didn't make sense. But he did it in AAA for 4 months at 21 years old. Makes a ton of sense. Did you happen to listen to the clip that I tweeted out after that happened about him kind of pitting himself against numbers?
I've listened to it in the past. I haven't seen it since you put it out, but remind me on some of those details. I know he like had some crazy goals for himself.
He had crazy goals, and it was like, I want to hit 300 with 30 bombs and 100 driven in. And like, okay, he got really close. Do you have like the standard numbers in front of you? Because I think he hit 306 with 29 homers. And
he hit 306 with 27 bombs and 38 doubles.
Okay, so he was 3 homers off of like actually doing it, because I think he drove in 100. Do you have RBIs in front of you?
I do not have RBI in front of me.
I can have RBIs. RBIs.
I disagree.
Man, it's weird, because wouldn't it be RSBI if we were trying to be overall like nice and all that? This guy had 101 driven in.
Okay.
So he was 3 homers off of his exact goals, 330 and 100. And he mentioned, and I clipped it and put it out on Twitter. He mentioned it's like, okay, yeah, I'm a very competitive person. I want to pit myself against other people that are my caliber and, my level and all that. But it's so situational. We all play a different number of games and we play against different competition. So the way that you compete in baseball is by competing with numbers. And he
Yep.
wanted to beat numbers pretty
Hmm.
much. And you know what? He's kind of kicked numbers ass over the
Yeah.
last 2 years.
I mean, it suffices to say, like he's if your goal is 30 home runs, which is an outrageous goal, by the way, especially when you're 21 and
21 and double and triple. Yeah.
double and triple. And I don't know how the environments are, and I don't have like the park factors in front of me. I don't know how Toledo stacks up against some of the other ballparks in AAA, but
Normal.
it's not like he was in some hitter friendly environments to say the least. Like it was just kind of normal environments overall. Going into kind of what makes Keith, I think, and it'll bleed into the conversation. So we'll segue it, right from there into what I would look for in those types of deals, player wise, like who I'd be giving these to, is you got to look at Keith and try to poke a hole in his offensive game because it's all about the bat, as we mentioned, right? Try your best to poke a hole in his offensive game, and here are the ways that I would try to do it. Okay, does he swing and miss? The answer is already no. He had above average contact rates despite being younger, at more challenging levels. And we've seen the field of hit. He has a track record of it, and the swing is beautiful. How's the approach? It's really damn good. He specifically is more aggressive against fastballs and lays off of breaking balls really well. Chase rate below 25%. And when you get to breaking balls, even lower in the chase rate department. How does he hit lefties? I don't want a platoon guy on a pre-arb deal usually, especially if he's not playing, premium position. He hit 306 overall. He hit 306 against lefties. Okay. How does he hit breaking balls overall? Uh he slashed 310, 394, 586 against breaking balls. All right. Is the power going to translate in a ballpark where, dude, it's hard to hit it out there? Yeah. 90th percentile of 105, hits the ball in the air consistently, a ground ball rate of just 35%. And even if it's not getting out of the yard, it's all fields, gap to gap. He will find so much space out there. So he hits lefties well. He hits breaking balls well. Maybe one of the more important prerequisites for me is, can you hit velocity? Because that's all you're going to see. And that's kind of the biggest risk is if you can't hit velocity, half the pitches you're going to see are fastballs, and the average fastball velocity is 94 miles an hour in Major League Baseball. Against 93 plus last year, Cole Keith hit 338, 409, 563. Like, again, you said it, anything can happen, but anything can happen to anybody at any time in baseball, anywhere. You got to make your most educated gambles, and you cannot find a problem with him offensively. And that's why I think he's the perfect guy for this kind of deal, despite not having the defensive prowess. So that leads me into it. I think there's two buckets that you can put these pre-arb guys into. If it's the bat first guy, you got to attack it, I think, the way that we just did. And just try to find a hole in the offensive game. If you do, then I'm a little worried because there's not a lot of other ways that he can help you.
Yeah.
If it's another situation where you talked about the defense and that's something that you're more comfortable with, it's got to be a premium position. I don't care if you're an elite defender at second base. It's got to be shortstop, center field, maybe third base, like a Brian Hayes type of situation, and of course,
Yeah.
like catcher. But I don't think we're going to see a pre-arb deal for a catcher. Usually, those guys are going to have to debut and work with a big league pitcher and big league staff.
Right.
Like, is there anything I'm missing here? Because I think for the defensive side of things, it's got to be a really good glove, and I still got to feel pretty darn good about the bat. It's got to be a really special glove at a premium spot, and I still got to feel pretty decent about the bat. But I almost feel safer with the Keith type sometimes because on the other side, you're trying to figure out if that glove is going to translate the same way and if the bat's going to translate the same way. And if one doesn't, that guy's kind of a bench player for you. Whereas for Keith, maybe the bat doesn't translate totally the way you thought it would. He's still probably an everyday hitter for you. So
Yeah.
that's the one side of it for me.
So I want, and like my criteria is I want defensive versatility. I'd prefer defensive excellence at a premium spot, but in both the offensive and defensive bucket, I want to doomsday you and not be terrified of what I see when it comes to worst case scenario. With Keith, What do you get worst case scenario defensively? A below average second baseman or a below average third baseman? You're
Yeah.
not getting a DH. You're getting a guy that can play second or third at a high level. No, but at a major league passable level,
Yeah.
yes. And I can appreciate that. I'm looking at somebody like a Wyatt Langford to spoil like the candidates that I would entertain extending. What is the worst case defensive ability for Wyatt Langford look like? An average defender in left field?
Yeah, I would say like maybe like a guy that surprisingly grades a little below average in the corners where you're like,
Okay.
whoa,
So
yeah.
you give me an average corner outfielder. Best case scenario is obviously a guy that can hit 40 homers and stay in center. But I want to look worst case. There are other guys like Jordan Lawler. He turns into a top flight second baseman, worst case scenario, probably. Maybe
Well,
he loses a step and he's an above average. Yeah,
or he plays superb defense at shortstop and is like an 8-9 hitter. Like he's Geraldo Perdomo. I think like like if it
exactly.
doesn't work, I think that's kind of the one of the worst case scenarios is that he's something adjacent to Geraldo Perdomo. Like I don't see it being much worse than that.
So I want to doomsday you and still see a $4 or $5 million player. And I think that I can do that with several of those guys. I don't love the idea of like a Pete Crow Armstrong because I doomsday him defensively and he's still a Gold Glove caliber center fielder, but I doomsday him offensively, and I'm like, I don't even know if you're a major league hitter.
No, no, you're totally right. I mean, with the red flags there, I mean, yeah, he's a fourth outfielder if the bat doesn't come along the way that we're hoping. It needs to just be
Exactly.
league average. So I can understand trying it, but it's one of those situations where I'd rather wait and see.
So for me, it's a blend of okay, worst case scenario, I take your offensive production and your defensive production, and I think I'm going to get a 2 win player
Yeah.
or a 1.5 win player. And if I see that, I'm comfortable doing something like this with Colt Keith. And I think the lowest outcome you get from Colt Keith is a guy that is a 110 WRC plus and he's a 1.5, 2 win player. And that's absolutely
Yeah.
worth
Yeah,
6 years for
you're
28.
not losing sleep on that at all, and you decline the option later. Then if but you're not. You're like, oh, $24 million for 2 wins a year. Like that's fine. Yeah, it's a lefty power bat. You're going to be fine with that, and then that is kind of the lower end scenario. What's interesting is what you described is Scott Kingery, and I think that's why the Phillies were intrigued and gave Scott Kingery this offer, which was what was the full breakdown of the deal? It was, I mean, I know they just declined his $13 million option this past offseason. But the intrigue to Kingery was great on the base paths, can play all over, elite defender at second, can plug it short, can play the outfield, all that good stuff, right? But then he gets to the big leagues and you kind of grade it out as a below average second baseman at points. And you plug him at third, yeah, the defense was fine there. You plug him at short, he was fine there, I guess. Like it was fine defense in several different spots. Center field, it was fine. So okay, yeah, you had a nice utility piece. But at the end of the day, and in today's sport, like you gotta hit. You just have to. So
Yeah.
unless you're Tommy Edman, where you're gonna, and I think maybe they thought he was gonna be Tommy Edman.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at those types, you got to really look at the data then. How fast is he? How hard is he hitting the baseball? Like, how are these? Because Tommy Edman hits the ball hard. And I don't think people like totally realize that. And he also flies and he plays impactful defense at different spots. Kingery, it was like, okay, he's got great bat to ball, but doesn't hit the ball as hard as I think people might have hoped. He flies, but you can't steal first. And the defensive prowess maybe was not as he was versatile, but he wasn't elite anywhere, and that was kind of the problem. So I'd want a guy that yes, I want you to be versatile, but I want you to be able to be elite at least one spot if we're not betting on the bat. Ultimately, for me though, I think the hit tool is king, and that's going to be the biggest thing because that's what's going to translate. I think that's what's going to end up
Yeah.
contributing to you being successful at the big league level. And when we talk about some of the players, like to wrap up the show of like who we would attack, with these kind of offers and who we would potentially give it to, at the end of the day, I'm looking for the safest hit tools with enough impact. And then on the defensive side, I think it's got to be one of those situations where you have an elite defender that you can dream on offensive upside. So you can palate the volatility of offense, like a Lawler. Or some of the other names that we might float here. But I struggle a little bit with like the defensive first identity with those guys because there's a lot of really good defenders that like a Taylor Walls, man, like that guy's struggling to even give you a positive WAR. And that's where things can get a little bit difficult. I wanted to highlight one thing with Scott Kingery because I think, of course, hindsight's 2020. And I wanted to look back and say, okay, what did they miss here? Maybe Scott Kingery, just dealt with his own issues, dealt with certain things, or there was probably more to the story. But if you look at it, he historically never walked. He was always very aggressive.
Yeah.
And this is a dude that ran a 35% chase rate even in his best seasons. Uh, and I think that started to catch up to him at the higher levels. So you love this too, and this is a big part of it. If you're not an elite bat to ball guy, he was a good bat to ball guy. I think the hit tool also got upsold. Contact rates were slightly above average, so above average. If you walk a ton, I feel better too.
Yeah.
So he didn't walk at all. The hit tool was closer to above average than plus. The impact was average, and the defense, his value was versatility. That's a good player. That's not a pre-arb guy. And I think
That's
that's
the
where they
thing.
they chase the results more than the underlying data and info that was provided, I think.
So good defender, doesn't walk at all, chases a ton, who is still worth a pre-debut extension. Luis Robert. Why? Because he's an alien life form.
Yes.
Like Kingery's not an alien life form.
No.
So if you don't fit the bucket of, hey, I know worst case you're going to get on base at a 320 clip, you better be an alien. And that is Luis Robert, who won a gold glove, who, should have won rookie of the year in 2020, that kind of thing. He hasn't been healthy. He chases everything. He walks at maybe a 4% clip, but guess what? He's going to run into 30 and he's going to play elite defense. You need something to be elite at some point. And Kingery, like, some of it was good, but did they really close their eyes and see elite at any point? No, they
That's the
shouldn't
thing
have.
is if the ceiling is very good or the ceiling is really
Then
solid,
don't do this.
then don't
Yeah.
do a pre-arb deal. The pre-arb deal should be where you can dream on
The ceiling is
all-star.
we're robbing you. The ceiling
Yes.
is, oh my God, they're paying that for Ozzy Albies? Are we serious?
And then the floor, you're hoping is kind of what we talked about with Colt Keith. But yeah, that's the thing too, is if you're incurring risk, don't you want to have a lot of upside? It's like, why would I, invest in a volatile stock that, has a target price that's not that high, right? Like,
I want people like telling me that I beat the system if
yeah,
this all goes according to plan. And like they're angry at me because I beat the system so
yes.
well. And that never could have happened with Kingery.
Or Evan White, right? Like,
No, never.
Evan White didn't have the impact, and then he's at a position like first base. That's another one that I didn't get, right? If Evan White was putting up EVs of 110 as a 90th percentile exit velocity, and and I know he was a great defender at first. I don't care. Uh, that was another one that just didn't make sense to me because like, what's the worst case scenario? A glove first baseman. What's the best case scenario? 25 bombs, and like a decent batting. Like I didn't understand that one. And now we're seeing, I think, teams get away from that. And they're really only doing it with the guys that have massive upside, or you could do a really cheap one, a cheaper deal with a guy that, could be the Kingery type. But let's wrap
Yeah.
up with just like some of the players that you would give the deal to. It doesn't have to be at this present moment. It could be if they had the year that you think that they're going to have in 2024 as well. Who are some names that kind of come to mind for you when you think about that?
So number one by far is Wyatt Langford. And the last piece of criteria for me is I need a blend of hit and power that is rare. And
Yes.
Colt Keith has a blend of hit and power that is rare. Langford has that too. Langford has 40 to 45 homer potential, but guess what? He punched out 15% of the time between high A and double A. I want a guy that, worst case scenario, turns into a three true outcome guy and still has the chance for 30. Or he leans into the other side of it and he doesn't punch out and he runs into enough to hit a bunch of doubles. Langford is so far and away the number one option for me.
Mhm.
I
Which is why he
would
would never take one.
exactly. This guy's going to make
And
300
and
million
that's the tough
dollars.
part too. The very obvious guys, like they might not take it. I think like a Junior
Right.
Caminero might, but you never know. He might just say, "No, I'm not going to take it either." But
Yeah.
Caminero is another guy that it's like the power is a little bit above the hit, but it's average hit and then elite power. That's enough. That's unique enough for me on the left side of the infield. That's another guy that I think if Wander's contract gets voided, funnel most of that money over to Caminero, I think,
Caminero.
and give him a pre-arb deal because that's a guy too that I just even if he doesn't hit enough, you can't find 110, 90th percentile exit velocity very often, and while also being able to play a good third base and even plug in at shortstop. Uh, Even if the average is closer to 240, that guy's going to hit you 30 bombs and he's going to walk as he
Yeah.
continues to get better with his approach. I wouldn't blink at one with Caminero either.
So another guy for me is Kobe Mayo with Baltimore. I think Mayo fits this perfectly because best case transforms into a good third baseman that hits 30 to 35 homers and drives in 110, 115. Worst case scenario, you're getting 25 homers from a guy that's going to play a good first base because he figured out a way to play third base. Like I think the floor is so high for a guy that has a ton of power in Mayo. And he also strikes me as a guy that may take it because Holiday may say, oh, I'm going to ball out for 6 years and go get $300 million. Gunnar Henderson, looking more and more likely he's going to hit the open market. Adley Rutschman, looking more and more likely he's going to hit the open market. You may be running out of options. And I think Mayo is a very safe and good option.
And he walks. And again, I think you got to
Yes.
always look at like the range of outcomes. Okay, he strikes out more than I thought. Okay, well, he hits the ball in the air as much as anybody. He hits the ball hard as hell. He's not limited to first, as you mentioned, and he walks. Sounds good to me. And then you're also betting on the person too. And I think makeup is a huge part of it also. That's why I mean, everybody would give Evan Carter, a pre-arb deal, but he's obviously in a position now where he's
Right.
not going to do that. He's also already debuted. But it's funny because now I look at some of the other names and it gets interesting because you could look at like a Roman Anthony, and I think he makes a ton of sense because the bat to ball is great. Uh, he has the ability to stick in center. He put up unbelievable numbers in Double A. But even then, yeah, are you waiting? He's right on the edge for me, a Roman Anthony, where you could end up making out like a bandit,
Yeah.
but I don't know if we've seen just
Enough.
enough yet. Where would you go with Roman Anthony or no?
I wouldn't. I haven't seen enough in the upper levels yet. This guy has yet to make his AAA debut. I want a guy, and I'm going to go against it in a moment, but I want a guy that is already proven himself at both the upper levels in the minor leagues.
Mhm. Fair enough. I would say the one reason why I would consider Anthony is that he did put up good numbers in a cup of coffee and double and doesn't chase and hits the living crap out of the ball. But big trouble, if you look at the numbers against secondary stuff, not big trouble, but he was a young hitter against secondary stuff. And that could rear its head a little bit more at the upper levels. So, yeah, it's a guy that you're probably waiting and seeing a little bit more. I'm going to buck our trending. This is a guy that I would do it in 2 seconds, but you know this because it's the number one hit tool in the minor leagues for me. But Adael Amador, I know that he doesn't really check all the boxes that we talked about in
Yeah.
terms of he's going to play second base, a good second base. You could probably play shortstop in a pinch. I also think you could throw him in at third in a pinch. So he does give you at least the versatility. But for me, I think that the bat to ball is up there with anybody in the minor leagues. And I think the second he gets to the big leagues can be up there with anybody. His contact rates in the zone, out of the zone are unbelievable. His approach is unbelievable. And then you look at the EVs way higher than, it's not elite EVs, but it's above average or at least average. That's way higher than almost any other hitter that you're going to find in his contact bucket and in his profile bucket. Then you add the switch hitter. Then you add the fact that he's always been ahead of his years in terms of the levels that he's been playing. And I've heard nothing but unbelievable things about the makeup. That's a guy that I would bet on just because the hit tool is just so much of an outlier that I'd feel very safe, especially in Colorado, that he's going to be a good hitter. Like that's just a guy that I would comfortably buy a ton of stock in. And I know that he was a little bit shaky at the end of the year. He was hurt, came off the IL, playing in Double A, and then I think he's going to put up crazy numbers this coming year. I wouldn't blink at an offer for Amador, and I think he's a guy that we probably could see that deal happen with as he performs this year.
Yeah. I like it. One more guy for me. And I don't want to call this a cardinal rule, but the overall rule for me is never offer a pre-debut extension to a pitcher
Mm-mm.
unless they're perfect. And we've got a perfect pitcher in the minor leagues for this. He's simple. He throws strikes at will. And on a pitch by pitch basis, have we ever seen a guy look like he could be a big leaguer more than Paul Skeens at this point? I do think that Skeens, like the Reds bought out 1 year on the open market of Hunter Green. They are a small market team. The Pirates are a small market team. How valuable is that year on the open market going to be for Skeens? I think very valuable.
Yeah.
Does he sign it? No, I don't think so because he just got $9 million as a signing bonus. But do I entertain the offer? Yes, I do. Because what does the worst version of Paul Skeens look like? Okay, 102 ticks down to 100. Okay, the slider goes from a 75 grade pitch to a 65 grade pitch.
Yeah.
Like he is.
There's
I don't
just
want
there's
to,
just no world unless his arm falls off, knock on wood. Yeah,
but like,
that
how's it going to fall off? He's 6'6", 250, and he
yeah.
has the regimen of like a literal like Air Force cadet. Like it's
No,
insane.
I'm with you. I would do that to buy out a year or two. I wouldn't honestly like both parties. I think you just do that and it would be fair. I think if you're going to talk pitchers too, the only other name I would consider is Job because of his arsenal across the board. His injury was a back thing that he talked about. They were super cautious with, came back throwing harder, and he's healthier and cleaner delivery than he's ever had. And that's a guy that will be big league ready this coming year. I would never do it with a pitcher, but if I were to do it with one, other than Skeens, it would be somebody like Jackson Jobe, where fills up the strike zone, four pitches that are all good,
Right.
athletic as could be, not hasn't had specific arm issues. Again, it was just the back, so not as many miles on his arm either because they were so cautious with him, and he looked fantastic down the stretch. One more name, and it will really depend. It would have to be at the end of this year. Kyle Teal, the cheapo Red Sox nowadays.
Yeah.
Teal is so good defensively, and I know catchers are kind of a no-no too, but Teal is so good defensively and already has a hit tool that looks like plus to me. Okay, plus hitter with great defense. Even if he doesn't slug, that's a good catcher. We know how hard it is to find good catchers. We
Yeah.
talked about like the Gabby Moreno similarities there. Like, sign me up. I'd do that in 2 seconds. If he performs in Double A this year and gets a taste of Triple A, I think Teal is another guy that could be an easy target for that. And knowing how cheap the Red Sox are, they'd probably do that. Say we've got catcher locked up now for the next 8 years and
Yeah.
can allocate that money elsewhere.
Worst case scenario, he's a seven hitter. Catchers are 7, 8 hitters
A
all the
left-handed hitting
time.
seven hitter that makes a lot of contact and plays great defense. Sign me up for that.
For a team that has been saddled with Connor Wong and Reese McGuire for the last 2 years, and we're going to
Yeah.
enter year 3 of the Connor Wong and Reese McGuire thing, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So look at us going with a pitcher and a catcher at the end of this after we were like,
Hey, we
no
always
pitchers,
got
no
to come
catchers.
around. Always got to come around. And then, like, to give an example, though, of one exception before we wrap up, Ceddanne Rafaela. It sounds interesting. He's one of the best defensive center fielders you're going to see, but I just don't think he's worth it because the floor is, oh my gosh, is this guy going to hit enough or is he going to swing at everything and just frustrate the hell out of me? And the
Yeah.
ceiling is really good defensive center fielder, elite defensive center fielder who, is an above average bat. That's a really good player, but the ceiling isn't, perennial all-star. I'm
Yeah.
not willing to take on that risk for not as much reward. And that's kind of where he sits there. We'll continue to monitor this. Like, I think we should do something as the season goes on. If someone is now entered pre-arb or pre-debut through like territory for you, you just mention it on the pod as we go through the season. Like, this guy just entered pre debut extension conversation for me, and we can
Cool.
do that. One other programming note: we're going to be continuing to go through the team top prospect list and the positional top prospect lists. Also, something I'm just kind of like kicking the tires on, but I'm just, as you know, listening to just if you follow just baseball, listen to the show, listen to anything that we do. We take a lot of pride in not putting things behind a paywall. I understand that that's a necessity for a lot of outlets out there to survive and to be able to pay their staff and things like that. And
Yeah.
it's been difficult to monitor, like to maneuver the way that we have without putting things behind a paywall. But that was the genesis of why we did this. We wanted to make information as accessible as possible to everybody because I was a broke college kid trying to figure out which subscriptions were worth it. And a lot of them are, and most of them are. There's some really good sites that I encourage people to subscribe to. But something that we've been kicking the tires on is a bonus episode of the call up when the season gets closer,
Yeah.
where it'll often, you might not always be you, Jack. Sometimes it'll just be me. but basically giving you everything that's going on in the minor leagues, almost like a heat sheet, keep you up to date with everything you need to know. And then some of my personal takeaways, thoughts. It's not going to take away from anything on the actual show. We will never withhold any information on the show, but there's always more that I want to talk about. If you can't tell, we already go over an hour every single episode. There's always more that I want to say, always more that I want to get into.
Yeah.
But I just don't have the time to do it. I wanted to do it, because we've had people clamoring for more. We're still going to do 2 to 3 episodes during the season, but I'd be happy to do it on the weekends if we do a bonus subscription model and I'm able to use some of those funds to, keep upping the production value of the show and keep investing into, what we're doing on the prospect side. So honestly, if you want to give me feedback, if people would be interested in that, like it's definitely something we're considering. Let us know in the YouTube comments, shoot me a DM. If you wanted bonus episode, like a bonus episode every week, and what you might want out of that, because again, I only want to do it if it's something that everybody wants and that, we do in a way that it checks all the boxes of what people feel like is missing from their coverage, because it already still feels weird for me to have like a subscription based anything. So I want to
Yeah.
make sure that it's worth everybody's while if we do that.
Makes sense.
All right. That'll do it for this episode. We'll be talking Yankees prospects with you next. Actually, top shortstop prospects,
Hmm.
then Yankees prospects probably next week. As always, thank you for listening. Any rating helps us grow the show. Looking forward to hearing your feedback on YouTube and or on Twitter DMs. And we will talk shortstop prospects with you later this week.